Right, let's kick off with our first question, which is from Graham Fillmore.
Should everyone, including politicians, have the right of free speech to express their opinion, even if others find it unpalatable?
So, Graham, I know because I checked with you beforehand that one of the reasons that you're asking this question is because of the comments made by the former Conservative Party Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson, MP, who said this week, Islamists have got control of Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. They've got control of London. They've got control of Starmer as well. Khan has given our capital city away to his mates. And the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, also added her voice. She said, the Islamists, the extremists and the anti-Semites are in charge now. Keir Starmer is in hock to the Islamists. Saida.
Well, freedom of speech is one thing. Talking absolute trash is something else. And when politicians make comments like that, which have no truth to them, have no evidence base to what they're saying, and they're simply being used as a way to incite and divide communities, that's wrong. Politicians have a responsibility. We have a public platform. We have the privilege of office, and we have to take that public office and that privilege incredibly seriously.
So Lee Anderson says, I mean, these are his words, he says, I am not a racist, and neither the Prime Minister nor prominent cabinet ministers have said that Lee Anderson is a racist. They've said they have a problem with what he said and it's unacceptable. Do you think what Lee Anderson said was racist?
What Lee Anderson said was a clear anti-Muslim trope. It was the stereotyping of a community, and if it was used in relation to any other community, we'd obviously recognise it as racist, and therefore for him to suggest what he was saying about Sadiq was clearly racist. And I think what's disappointing is that every organisation and institutions has individuals amongst it who may have unsavoury views, even racist views. But we're not going to be able to root all of those out. What an organisation has to do is when it sees them, it has to call them out and say, this is unacceptable, this is racist, and we will not tolerate it.
So why do you think the Prime Minister wouldn't do that? I mean, he took away the whip from Lee Anderson, but he has specifically not, even when questioned, called that language racist.
Yeah, for me, it's been so disappointing to see colleague after colleague come out this week on television and just say it was simply wrong. I mean, we've almost invented this new form of racism now called wrongism, because we don't want to call it out for what it really is. And in a lot of ways, this week, Fiona, actually has been difficult, but it's also been positive in the sense that for the first time, colleagues who have talked about this privately, like the ex-Chancellor, Sajid Javid, or people in the wider kind of right space, people like Ian Dale and others, have actually finally said enough. And so there have been more people calling this out and calling it unacceptable and racism. And unfortunately, this has been a long, hard battle. This has been going on for 7 or 8 years. The party have had the opportunity to deal with it. They failed to deal with it. In fact, they have people at the highest office now perpetuating this racism, and we've got to turn around now and say enough is enough.
OK. One last question, Dale, come to you. When you're saying this as a Conservative peer, when you say the highest office tolerating this kind of racism, who do you mean specifically?
I think the Prime Minister, by not calling out this racism, unfortunately, has tolerated it. And for me, as a person of colour, when the Prime Minister was elected, this was a huge moment for us. Okay. This was the first time we had a Prime Minister of colour, and it would be tragic, Fiona, if his tenure was really defined by it being mired in racism.
David.
Look, I definitely think we all want to live in a society where people are free to speak, they are free to offend, and that means sometimes on issues of religion, faith, sexuality, a whole raft of areas, people sometimes will offend, and we've got to defend the freedom to speak. But what we're seeing in politics at the moment is a nastiness. It's a cruelty. It's people in public office spreading conspiracy. There are big issues.
Are you including the Corbyn government in that?
You can see it on the extreme left, and you can certainly see it on the right, and I worry about what's happening to the Conservative Party. It's clear to me that as we head towards a London election, the state of our transport, housing issues in London, crime, these are legitimate areas of dispute and concern. But to give the impression that Sadiq Khan, who I think has tried to govern for all Londoners, whatever judgment Londoners make about him having a third term, to give the impression that he is in the pockets of the community from which he's from is shameful, nasty, mean. And it's the politics of division which we're seeing time and time again, which tears us apart and doesn't speak to the London that I've grown up in. This is a city where everybody has a place and everyone can make it. That's the London that I think we should defend. Lee Anderson's statements were shameful, and he should have been reprehensibly held to have been Islamophobic and racist in his intent, which is what I think was going on.
There's a number of hands. I'm going to come out to you in a moment. Tim, let me just bring you in first. So Graham's question, just let me remind you, should everyone, including politicians, have the right of free speech to express their opinion, even if others find it unpalatable? You know, where are the boundaries there?
Oh, well, the difference is between unpalatable versus illegal or discriminatory. That's the distinction. Gosh, this is such a tricky issue, and I feel like I can almost feel myself being cancelled before I begin to speak. But what Lee Anderson said was just wrong, right? So let's start with that. It was stupid and thick. The accusation that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists is absurd. Only a few days before, Sadiq Khan had named the overground lines after the women's football team and a former HIV/AIDS hospital. So if Islamists are controlling him, they're not doing a very good job. I mean, it made no sense. But he wasn't alone. Paul Scully also said this strange thing about parts of Britain being no-go areas. And he then immediately had to backtrack and apologise, probably again quite rightly, because the idea that there are literally places where you can't physically go is absurd. But I think what the Tories are trying to do is put their finger on a phenomenon which they themselves are struggling to define because it's very vague. And I think if Lee Anderson were here right now, picking up on your point about nastiness, David, he would say that he was responding to what he regards as the nastiness of certain protests and political pressure being placed upon MPs. He would say there are plenty of Jewish Londoners who right now don't feel happy or safe within London because of the ongoing protests. There are, of course, also MPs who have been forced to get security. And I think what they're trying to put their finger on is a couple of phenomena. One is the very real problem of small but significant Islamist pressure groups, which may be attempting to shape or shut down political debate. And the other issue, which is very difficult to define, but is this sense of Britain growing apart, and that there are certain the communities. And I know you're listening to say the Tories are fueling that by what they said.
Yes, they're driving it.
No, fair enough. OK, but here's the thing. We go back to the point.
You can finish your point.
But I'm sorry, if it's a reality and it's happening, then we have to address it and discuss it. And I began by saying what he said was wrong. It was wrong. But let's not run away from the context of what he said, which is a couple of weeks in which MPs have been threatened, in which a debate in Parliament was effectively shut down, and many people feel in this country that they can't speak their mind. And they feel that it's becoming very difficult for them to articulate how they feel about certain subjects. Let me put it this way. I'll throw out a provocation. If I were to come onto this programme and say I thought Jesus Christ was a fraud, the most I would receive is a couple of angry letters from Tunbridge Wells. If I were to say something analogous about Islam, and note that I don't even have the courage to put into words what that might mean, I would very probably face threats of violence. That's nasty. That needs to be called out too.
OK, I'll come back to you on that, David. Let's hear from our audience. It's the man at the back with the... Yes, you with the grey jacket on.
I think there's a few things. Firstly, I think people who go on about free speech don't understand that freedom of speech does not mean, having no freedom from consequence. You can, say what you want, but people are going to, react a certain way, and you're going to face consequences of what you said. I think more broadly speaking, I think the anti-Islam rhetoric of the Tory party is something that is a big problem. A lot of people who are on the right of the party don't think Islamophobia is an actual sort of thing, because they think it's a made-up word to kind of, just like defend. It's not right. And I think, quite frankly, there needs to be a situation where people are able to, people who are Muslim are just able to just live and not have people like, I don't know, Lee Anderson say such disgusting things like that, personally. So that's my opinion.
OK, thank you. Yes, a woman there. Yes, with the scarf, yeah.
While I recognise that anti-Semitism is an issue in the UK among politicians, but also among the general public, and I know lots of people would agree with me, anti-Semitism is an issue that not only exists, but needs to be dealt with sympathy. However, do you think that politicians in this country are almost overcompensating the issue and has actually led into Islamophobia and has caused politicians like Lee Anderson and others among him to actually tip into Islamophobia as a result of perhaps overcompensating the issue which exists of anti-Semitism?
So prioritising one sector of the population over another.
I think what we should expect from our politicians is leadership, and I think leadership in lots of different ways, but picking the language that they use in a sensible and mature way, rather than curtailing to popularism for an easy vote, is something that we should all be expecting.
So when the Prime Minister said yesterday, I think it's reported in the papers today, that he warned of the risk of democratic rule giving way to mob rule, how do you respond to that?
I would say that he needs to look at his own actions and some of the decisions that he's made during his leadership and some of the things that he's supported, and look at how the Tory party in general has stoked that mob. Before they use language like that and question democracy, I think they've got a real part to play in that, and they should be leading us to a better place.
OK, Caroline.
Well, on that in particular, the Prime Minister's words on this mob rule are the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook, and if we're looking at who is acting like a mob right now, frankly, it's the people who are supposed to be running the country. It really matters the kind of language that the Prime Minister uses, that the Deputy Chair of the Tory party uses. Language really matters. And what concerns me is, of course it was wrong, but it was worse than wrong, and it should be named as anti-Muslim hate, as Islamophobia, because naming it matters. And it was excruciating, frankly, listening to, I think it was Michael Tomlinson, 6 times refusing to say why it was wrong to say what Lee Anderson said. And the Tory party's inability to name that really worried me. But I think what's really going on here is something far more dangerous than Lee Anderson just, accidentally perhaps using anti-Muslim tropes. What's happening, I think, is a very deliberate strategy by this government to lurch to the hard right in order to try to prevent some of their MPs going off to join Reform. I think what's happening is deeply, deeply dangerous, because what used to just be a dog whistle is now, frankly, a bloody great foghorn and a megaphone. And it is causing lots of anxiety. We know that the numbers of cases of anti-Semitism have risen 6-fold since the awful atrocities back in October. The number of hate crimes against Muslims has increased 3-fold. Language has consequences, and I think we absolutely need to call out this unelected Prime Minister who is leading one of the most unpopular governments in all time, and he is deliberately, divisively using this language to divide our country and pull it apart. And we have to call that out, otherwise it's going to end in a grim way, I think.
Saida, can I just come back to it? I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Saida, I should give you an opportunity to respond to what Tim was saying. And Tim was using the analogy, correct me if I misrepresent what you said, Tim, but if you were to say Jesus Christ was a fraud, you might get a few complaints, but frankly...
Careful, because...
Not very much. If you said something similar about Islam,
yes.
The kind of response you worry you might get, would it be as acceptable to... to say something like that?
I think Tim's understanding of Islam is so fundamentally flawed. The great tradition of debate, discussion, disagreement is a fundamental part of the faith. There has always been huge discussions and debates and disagreement. And in fact, one of the things that the parliamentarians who came up with the definition of Islamophobia, which is a cross-government definition, the two things that they made absolutely clear was that this definition was in no way there to protect Islam, it was there to protect believers, and that
so
definition
it would therefore be acceptable to criticise it as a religion if one wanted to
I do it every single week. I have conversations every single week about how you interpret that particular verse, how that would be seen, how women's rights were seen, what the history was in relation to LGBT rights. These are conversations that are happening every single day, every single week in countries around the world. But you know what we try and do? We perpetuate this trope about Islam and Muslims. We try and present them as somehow slightly less sophisticated, underdeveloped. It's all part and parcel of what we've been seeing from certain right-wing media, from certain think tanks, from certain members of the public. And it's because there is a clear strategy to other this community. Two grandfathers lost their lives in this country because they were attacked because they were Muslim. We've just heard the statistics from Caroline. This is real. This has real life consequences. In the last 7 days, we've had 3 far-right extremists arrested for planning a terrorist attack against, they were looking for an Islamic institution to attack. This has real life consequences, and I have spoken to my colleagues over and over again that, look, this is either two things. Either my colleagues are so dim that they cannot understand the consequences of what they're doing when it's staring at them in the face, or they are doing this deliberately to divide communities, to other this community because they think it's an election strategy. Exactly. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's going to stop.
Tim, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think the government is deliberately doing this because it immediately sacked Lee Anderson and it's embarrassed by the row and it's struggling to find, as I said, the right language to describe precisely why it is offended and why it was also wrong. Don't mischaracterise my views on Islam. I've written a great deal about the subject. You've got on your panel, I think, possibly for instance, the only Telegraph writer who has said there should be a ceasefire in Gaza and that Benjamin Netanyahu should go. I am very sympathetic towards, admire and respect Islam. Your characterisation of it is correct. It has many schools. It has a great deal of debate within it. It has had many reformations. And it really saddens me how it is misrepresented in this country. I'm not talking about Islam. I'm talking about a small group of people within it, political ideologues, who use threats of violence to try to impose one particular view upon other people, including non-Muslims and many Muslims, because there is a great deal of hate directed towards Muslims by other Muslims. That is a problem. It is real. And I just come back to the context for this whole discussion is that a debate in Parliament was shut down because of fears about the safety and security of MPs who feel that they cannot express themselves. So I know you would deny that, of course. So the question was about being able to say the unpalatable. That's what I'm pushing here. This is what is definitional to the West, is that so long as one does not encourage discrimination or violence, one should be allowed to interrogate ideas and religions. That's what I think the government is trying to cling to here. That's why it struggled to precisely define what it didn't like about Lee Anderson and what he said. Because it's trying to maintain the right to criticise ideas and political movements.
All right. Caroline, you forgive me, there's quite a lot of hands up, so I'm just going to go around to the... Yes, at the very back, there's 2 people. You've got sunglasses on, I can see. I know these lights are bright. I didn't know they were that bright. But anyway, off you go.
I promise I have a licence to wear these. They're not sunglasses.
Oh, forgive me.
I just want to start by saying I really commend Saida because I think she has the patience of a saint to remain in a party that is actively hating people like her. So, I mean, well done to you. God bless you. But I think the first important point I want to make is if it looks like a duck, if it says Sadiq Khan, who is a Muslim who is brown, is being controlled by Islamists, it's an Islamophobic duck. And you have to be able to say that. Why is that important? Caroline already said. And for me, what's really wild about this entire debate is that people are forgetting that Lee Anderson is the very same man who about 18 months ago was on, I think, GB News or one of these other fringe media sites, talking about how the government does not have a concrete plan for the general election, so they are going to fight this election on culture wars. This is a culture war issue. But the last thing I'd like to raise is that I believe it was some Tory minister on LBC yesterday talking about how, in similar lines to Tim, you know, we should be able to critique a faith, and we should be able to critique people who are part of this faith, you know, without being discriminatory. But people seem to be forgetting that we've been members of the Labour Party. I'm not a member of any political party, but I just want to say, members of the Labour Party who are critical of Israel have been expelled from the Labour Party because they have been literally, for really spurious reasons, up until just a couple of months ago. So it's really interesting for me to look at David, because you're also complicit in creating this atmosphere, this McCarthyist environment, where people feel like people are not allowed to have contrary opinions. If we are, you know, this great Western society where freedom of speech is important, then of course we must be able to critique political Islam, Islamists who do send threats to people. We should be able to say, not all Muslims are Islamists. I live in Tower Hamlets. There's no no-go areas in Tower Hamlets. It's a great borough. And equally, we should also be able to say that the nation, the government of Israel, is committing really, really horrific acts against a civilian population. And people should not be expelled from the Labour Party. They should not be expelled as councillors, as actually a Jewish councillor from Lambeth Labour Party was only recently expelled.
Well, should we give David... You make your point so cogently. Shall I give... No, not at all, please, honestly. You make your point so well. David, would you like to respond?
Well, look, the point is made well, and the earlier parts of what you said I would agree with, but I do have to come back on the Labour Party. I'm sorry, but I was there under Jeremy Corbyn. It was ugly, it was nasty, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. I was threatened with deselection because I wanted to defend and support Jewish brothers and sisters. I've been an anti-racist all of my life, fighting racism wherever it's found. And I'm afraid we do have to stand up to some of the nastiness that is, I'm afraid, in a segment of our party, and we have to be absolutely clear about the rules. That does not mean that you can't criticise the state of Israel. That does not mean you can't criticise Bibi Netanyahu. That does not mean you can't question aspects of a religion, Judaism. Of course you're free to do all those things. But when you cross over into anti-Semitism or racism or Islamophobia, we have to be clear about that as a political party. You're free to go somewhere else, but you're not free to peddle that within the Labour Party. We've got to be clear about that.
Right, Caroline, you want to come back in?
Obviously, I agree about not peddling anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, but I did just want to pick up, David, on the point that the lady at the back raised about the councillors in Lambeth, because as I understand it, there were 4 Labour councillors in Lambeth who've been suspended simply for supporting a ceasefire motion, a Green motion, as it happened at Lambeth Council. Now, surely that is going to the other extreme, to start suspending members for supporting a ceasefire motion. That is supposed to be Labour Party policy in any case. So I think there needs to be some consistency here, and I do think that Labour is being incredibly draconian with some of its members when they do want to be able to represent their constituents, the vast majority of whom want a bilateral ceasefire now, and recognise that there's, you know, hiding behind mealy-mouthed words doesn't actually help the people who are suffering in so many numbers right now in Gaza. So let's allow councillors, for heaven's sake, to be able to support a ceasefire if that's what their constituents are asking.
Really briefly, David, really briefly.
I don't know the circumstances in Lambeth, but what I do know is the position of the Labour Party is that we support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire now. The fighting has to stop now.
So why were they suspended?
Well, that's why I'm worried about the caricature. But that is the Labour Party position. We want an immediate humanitarian ceasefire now.
All right. And that, too, is a subject I do not doubt that we will come back to, and rightly so.